And we're live! Welcome to another episode of Chat with the Archaeologist, presented by the Mesa Prieta Petroglyph Project. I am once again your host, Chester Levash, and our guest who will be joining us this week is me. That's right. This episode is just going to be me, no special guest speaker. We're going to do a bit of a roundup of some of the stories that we've covered earlier in the year, kind of revisiting the stories as they've developed, and answering some more of your questions about those particular stories that maybe we didn't get to on air. Of course, we're also going to get into some of the recent research done here at Mesa Prieta. I tend to do these updates every couple of months, and we have an extended archaeology in the news segment. 6 stories instead of our normal 3 to 4. So essentially a double-length archaeology in the news segment. In fact, including the updates from Mesa Prieta and the Wales Petroglyph Preserve, this is really kind of an extended archaeology in the news episode. We also have some announcements about the future of this webcast series, as well as some other announcements. We'll get into the rest of that, but I do have some announcements before we do our intro. And first off, that's going to be thank you to everyone who has shown interest in tours, who have come to the Wales Preserve for tours. I know this year has been rather hectic and confusing. We've set a lot of goals about opening dates, about when we're going to hold tours, how many tours, what kinds of groups we can accommodate, and often we've had to move those goalposts. As you know, last year and this year have been very unpredictable, and we've been trying to ensure the safety of you, of our volunteers, and also to still provide this educational opportunity to the public. So thank you everyone for your interest, and we are excited that we did get tours going at least in some capacity this year. In fact, we've been running at capacity since opening up, despite having a more restricted schedule and more restrictions on the sorts of tours. We've been doing only group tours rather than mixed group public tours. So that's really exciting that you folks are that interested in actually coming to the preserve and seeing the petroglyphs in person. For those of you who haven't, whether you're here in New Mexico or whether you're watching from elsewhere, hello Ohio, I know y'all out there. And, hello to anyone in California tuning in. I know we've got some audience members out that way too. So for those who are not in New Mexico, who are tuning in from further away, we also have our virtual tours. And I've got an update on the virtual tours that we're going to do after the intro clip as well. We do hope to bring in-person tours to you again next year in 2022. Normally, we would open around mid-March after being closed. It's November now, so we're closing down for the season. We hope to open again in mid-March, but this might be pushed back depending on how the pandemic continues to develop. But we do plan at some point next year to have in-person tours again. A lot of the legwork and groundwork to make that possible we did this year, and so it will be less of an uphill battle. We should have a longer season and more tour dates available, but don't hold me to that because the situation is very unpredictable. Weather is also a limiting factor, and one of the reasons why we close down for tours in the winter is because once we get that first snow, the ground gets icy, it gets muddy, it becomes dangerous to you. Very high chance that you or one of our docents slips, gets injured, even a minor injury we don't want to happen. And also it just becomes a very unpleasant experience when it's cold, everything's slippery, you're going from mud to ice to mud again. It's not great. This is why we don't do tours in the winter, but again, hopefully in the spring. If we have late snows in the spring, that may impact our tour schedule. So we do hope to provide you updates as we start to gear back up again, but just hold on that. Also, volunteers. I've been getting some requests for volunteers for recording. Now, for those of you who don't know, who are more recently becoming involved with the project, we have ultimately canceled our in-person petroglyph recorder training that we would normally hold at the start of April. We've canceled it the last 2 years now. Of course, that's because of the pandemic, and we did expect both last fall, we thought we were going to be able to do it, and then things got worse, and then, things were bad this spring, so we thought we were going to be able to push it back into the summer, but by the time we had our window, we had a very short window in July. We were really prioritizing opening for tours, and we've been very fortunate to have a dedicated corps of recording volunteers who have already been trained, still going out to the Mesa and actually doing quite a bit of work. So that kind of got deprioritized, and by the time we got back around to it, stuff started to get bad again, and we decided that it wasn't the right time. We weren't able to get an in-person venue where we could do the classroom portion. I've made some online training materials available for those of you to whom I've sent the link. You should have the link. If I haven't sent you the link, or if you're interested, if I've overlooked you, or if you simply didn't apply before about mid-April of this year, send me an email. I can send you the materials. You can at least review before we go back to that in the spring. Like I said, the Mesa is not necessarily the most pleasant place to be in parts of the winter. You really don't want to be slipping and sliding around when there's these, hard boulders everywhere. And we have people who have gotten injured in good weather doing this. So safety first, seriously. So we'll put that off. Hopefully we can do that in spring. It's probably going to be more of a hybrid course now that we've gotten organized for doing an online portion and an in-person portion. So rather than doing an extended classroom section, we may shorten that time and do a sort of hybrid classroom model for the petroglyph recorder training in 2022. So if you are interested, we're not going to be taking new crew members until at least next spring. That's the earliest possible. It would be about April of next year. But you should have the online materials, or email me. You can find my email on our website. My email is chester@mesaprietapetroglyphs.org, and I can happily share with you the links. More announcements. Of course, when you go to our website, you'll see donate via cryptocurrency. So I want to push that once again. You can donate to the Mesa Prieta Petroglyph Project using Bitcoin, Ethereum, heck, Dogecoin. We don't discriminate what digital coin you use, so go ahead, donate via crypto. We've got that crypto burning a hole in your digital wallet. So especially with our winter appeal coming up shortly, think about that. All right, that's it for initial announcements. We're going to do our intro and then get into today's episode. So thank you for tuning in and enjoy. And we're back. I'm going to be playing around with the presentation mode here, depending on what I'm trying to show you. So, of course, chat with the archaeologist over here, over here doing the air quotes thing. Still got the same hair, doing a little something different here, but it's still me. I like to change it up. So, we're going to dive in, and our first announcement post-intro is going to be that there we go. The Petroglyph Project was recently featured in the PBS documentary, However Wide the Sky, Places of Power. This is a film made by, I believe, Silver Bullet Productions, and features a number of prominent places. You've all heard of Chaco Canyon, of bear's ears, and it's showing Mesa Prieta right alongside those. This documentary is actually currently available online through our local PBS station's website. Link is down in the description, so you can follow that link. That's, again, down in the description to watch the documentary online. Or if you want to see it on the big screen, we are planning to do a public screening of this. Venue and date to be determined. But we do have permission to do this. We're hoping to hold a screening event in the not too distant future, so definitely tune in for that. You'll get to see some of the petroglyphs, many of which are probably familiar, some of which aren't on our current tours. So again, it's another opportunity to get a peek at the Mesa, both what you can normally see, what's familiar, and what you can't normally see. Also, there's an interview from our very own Matthew Martinez. Matthew Martinez is one of our dedicated board members, has done quite a bit for the project. He's been an exceptional liaison, having been a former lieutenant governor of the Pueblo of Okeawinge. Absolutely thrilled to see Matthew featured in the documentary, and this documentary over here. So definitely check that out. If you can make the in-person screening, again, we're not sure exactly when or where. We're hoping to do that. I'm not even going to say exactly when or where, but we're hoping to do that before too long. Check back with us for more details on that. If you're one of our viewers, like I mentioned, from California, Ohio, heck, Maine, then watch it online. Watch it through our local PBS website. They've got the link there. I'm not sure how long that link's going to be available, so don't wait. And why not see it twice? If you're planning to make the screening or you're not sure, watch it online, then come see it on the big screen with us. We'll make an event out of it. So definitely stay tuned for that. And we are, of course, honored and thrilled to be featured alongside these other places. Another announcement. Season 3 of Chat with the Archaeologist. We've had some discussions back and forth internally. As you know, we're doing Season 2 right now. We're happy to announce Season 3. Now, Season 3 is actually going to begin next month, and there's a reason for that. Chat with the Archaeologist was initially funded by the National Endowment for the Humanities, and then later on, the New Mexico Humanities Council. I might have that flipped. But it was initially funded beginning with the start of the pandemic through November of last year. And that was the run that we were supposed to do. Of course, by November of last year, the pandemic was ramping back up again. We hadn't been able to do any in-person events, whether public events or volunteer events, just none of them last year. So we decided to continue with chat. Coffee, important stuff. So November of last year was really the last episode of our initial round of funding of our first season. I decided to stick with that same format through December of last year, mostly because I wasn't down for putting in the effort to revamp the stream. I knew I wanted to do some changes. We were getting user suggestions, but wasn't quite ready to implement those changes until after the winter holiday. So we kicked off Season 2 in January, but really November right now is the anniversary of the end of that initial round of funding, of those first few planned episodes. Like when we went from Season 1 to Season 2, when we implemented a number of changes, including user suggestions, trying to touch on more topics that you were more interested in, and bringing in guest speakers, we're going to implement some more of those changes for Season 3. Season 3 is going to be a limited run. Like I said, starting in December. So our very next episode will be guest archaeologist Ken Fetter, and Dr. Ken Fetter, and we are thrilled to have him on. Dr. Fetter will be discussing archaeological oddities, and that's really going to be the running theme for this limited 6-episode run that we're starting Season 3 with. These 6 episodes are planned to deal with some more popular archaeology topics and some more stuff that maybe we don't necessarily discuss as often in scholarly circles. Maybe we should, maybe we shouldn't. We have all the freedom we want on this stream, so we're going to do that. Each episode has a guest speaker, although I am preparing at least one of these episodes, but we plan to have some guest speakers, and starting off with Dr. Fetter is incredible because this is actually a pretty well-known name in archaeology. Very entertaining and popular archaeologist, but very good at what he does. So this is going to be an amazing talk. Please do tune in December. We're going to have, again, some tweaks and changes to the format, but it's going to look very familiar to Season 2. So absolutely thrilled to announce this renewal for Season 3. Right, and now our next story, and I can actually pop on over here next to these. We've relaunched our virtual reality tours. Like I said to our friends from out of state, we're making these available to you for if and when you can't make it to the preserve, especially since we're closing down for the winter season fairly soon here. We've added some new content and changed the formatting. First up, you'll notice the initial 4 tours have been on there for a while, but then over on the far, well, right of your screen, to my left, but to your right, you'll notice we've added a flute players tour. This is brand new content, and in part a result of our recent conference attendances. So I'm going to show you some of that content and recap some of what we discussed at the Colorado Rock Art Association's recent virtual conference. This isn't going to be a verbatim reproduction of that talk, but I definitely want to show you some of the changes that we've made to these. That's going to be, there we go. All right, so these are virtual reality tours, but I'm presenting this to you on a laptop, so I'm not going to be swinging this laptop around. But if you have a smartphone or tablet with a gyroscope and compass in it, you'll actually be able to view these in immersive virtual reality. For those of you who are viewing this on the computer, you can do just what I'm doing right now and use your mouse to pan around. You can even zoom in, you can zoom out. Yeah, it's a nice, you can see these in their settings. So that's not necessarily new though. You've been able to see each of these stops just like that. What is new is that we've added the interactive elements into here so you don't have to jump out of the screen and scroll down through the page. You can see the tour right from inside of the tour. We have these little info boxes. All you have to do is hover on them, or on a smart device, just tap with your finger and it'll provide some text information about what you're looking at and some of the background behind it. I've edited these down a little bit just so they display correctly. While the text box does take a small space on a computer screen, it can take a large space on a smartphone, and we don't want to take up your whole screen or have you have to pan up to be able to see that. So I've tried to be more concise about the context of these. And you can see that right next to the image now. So this is pretty fun. I've been aiming to do this for a while, and we finally sorted through some of the technical issues. Shout out to Alex Kershaw for helping me with that as well. Alex Kershaw. Yeah. So also you'll notice these arrows. I would like to get these oriented, but you'll notice that the left arrow, the arrow to the left of the panel at each stop is going to be your previous tour stop, and the one to the right is going to be your next tour stop. So these ones are pretty familiar. These heraldic lines. This is a very faint one, so here we go. There's this thing kind of over the head. Now we have the head itself, so you can kind of see the face, almost looks like it's frowning. There's one limb outstretched with one forelimb down, There's the body kind of tapering off, and there's another animal here. So that's kind of neat. That's where we ended our Lions tour before, though. So we have new content, all right? A lot of these pre-existing tours, these old tours, we've added a new stop or two. Yeah, look at that. And if I can hop out of this for a second and make sure that scroll down the page. We also have a tour gallery. So some of these stops have these 3D models like these that you can take a look at. Yeah, and if you have on your smartphone, if you have a viewer, you can view these in VR. The way that we're presenting these is that it's the split screen, the dual screen, so you'll need a viewer. But yeah, you can, and it's the same thing. You can just look around it rather than looking around yourself. So this is kind of neat. And again, we added some new content. So you can also take a look at, this was a new panel. You can take a look at that one. We can zoom in and take a look around. Look at the pecking on there. So compare that with what you see in this scene. Yeah, I know the colors look a little different, but hey, we get the view around you and the view around some of these panels. So for those that do have a 3D model, we have those below in what we're calling the tour gallery. We also, for some of them, have higher resolution imagery as well. So that's the revamped Lions tour, but actually what I presented on was flute players. And so we've got an extended flute players tour. I'm just going to go through this fairly quickly. Make sure to check it out for yourself, especially since I'm not necessarily going to take you to all the stops or fill you in on all the information. Again, we have the information bubbles here. But what I was really trying to show is the diversity of our flute players and the themes that commonly connect them. For those of you who have been on our in-person tours, you're probably familiar with some of our flute player images. And the very basics of a flute player is, you see, so we have these human figures, anthropomorphic flute players. They'll have a headdress, usually 2 feathers, sometimes more, sometimes none. The human ones all have what we call a fertility hump. This is maybe a basket. It's probably just some kind of symbolic addition to the depiction. It's certainly not any kind of physical deformity. How we know them is by having this flute here, and they're always depicted in profile with the arms outstretched, flute down, roughly 45-degree angle, give or take. We have, again, a number of these stops. Explore them yourself. What we can say about, we've got our anthropomorphic flute players, like this fella here. Many of the anthropomorphic ones are accompanied by an animal. We have what we call therianthropic flute players. They're somewhere in between human and animal. So if we take a look at this one, we'll notice 4 feathers on the headdress, fertility hump, bent knees, very human legs, but this one also has a tail. We have a number of them that are like that, and quite a few on this tour that are depicted like that. So that's a part of the variety. And of course we have our zoomorphic flute players. Those would be our animal flute players, and that includes the so-called ant body. Now some of the ant body flute players may actually be anthropomorphic, in other words, depictions of humans that are exaggerated. You can easily see how the 2 antennae could just be the 2-feathered headwear, and the lumpy thorax could be the fertility hump. Nonetheless, this is almost certainly some kind of arthropod because the abdomen is extended behind the hips. While we might colloquially refer to these as animal flute, or as ant-bodied flute players specifically, we have a lot of different animals depicted, ants among them. It's quite likely that this could be some other kind of arthropod, specifically cicada. Of course, we do have cicadas on the mesa, especially in May and June. They tend to go off. It is a really interesting audio experience to hear the cicadas. And we know that a cicada flute player was important in Hopi stories because we've seen cicada flute players in Hopi petroglyphs and Hopi kiva murals, as well as we know some of the oral traditions around those. Whether the stories would be the same for the Tewa of the northern Rio Grande, maybe, maybe not. Probably some different stories here. Something I do want to mention about our flute players, as I'm just kind of scrolling through some of these here, is we often get the question of why don't you call them Kokopellis? Well, Kokopelli is a flute player, but is a specific Hopi Katsina, a specific individual being. And there are many different flute players. And so that's why we have these connecting themes, always in profile, arms outstretched, flute down at an angle. We also see quite a diversity. A lot of them are very individualized, like this animal flute player right here. In fact, you can tell by the banding on the neck that this is most likely an armadillo. In fact, this flute player is on one of my favorite panels on the Wells Preserve. And we've got these two forward-facing figures. Actually, both of their mouths are open. I know it's hard to tell for the one on the far left here, but the more prominent figure, you can tell that that mouth is open. And then we have these very interesting figures over here. And these figures are interesting because, one, they're done with the conventions of anthropomorphic flute players. So they're definitely human. They're portrayed in profile. One of them at least has the headwear. Their arms are outstretched. They're holding something. They've got the fertility hump, but they're not playing flutes. In fact, you'll notice their mouths are open, and the objects they're holding are bows without arrows. Now, anthropologist John Harrington noted at the turn of the 20th century that the Rio Grande Pueblos did not use music bows. Now, this is a sort of single string harp-like instrument that has been independently invented several places in the world. And we think that that has existed in North America before. In fact, there is ethnographic evidence from some of the peoples with whom the Pueblos were in contact, like the Namak peoples, although often that was less peaceful contact. Nonetheless, we know it was within their world, and while it wasn't played at the turn of the 20th century, this might be evidence for the use of such an instrument during the Pueblo Classic period, from about 1350 until the time of contact. Now, that's not certain, because we do see ornamental bows used in dances to this day. And I say ornamental, they might be actual bows, they might be elaborated bows that are not necessarily tuned for hunting, but more tuned for the display. I don't want to give too much away, you just got to go to a dance and see it and experience it. So it is possible that these are more visually symbolic items and that they're not necessarily musical instruments, but since we have the open mouths across the panel, the only figure without an open mouth is the flute player, and these figures on the right hand side are depicted with the conventions of a flute player. It kind of hints that they are musicians, possibly even playing an instrument, and the instrument that seems to be depicted is the bow. So not definitive by any means, but interesting to consider. Now, there are several more stops on this tour. You may have noticed that I said it's an extended tour, both in the, well, right there, special extended edition. Yeah, so there's a lot more stops that I haven't shown you. I haven't elaborated on the stops that are there. So you're just going to have to go experience it for yourself. Head on over to our website, check it out. We've also got this nice 3D model. notice that, flute player. So there's a little bit of a, a little hint, a little spoiler. So to get to virtual tours, go to Visit the Wells Petroglyph Preserve. Click on Virtual Tours, and you'll see the links to all of these. Yeah, there we go. So all of these, there we go. Yeah, all 5 of these tours. I do have a 6th one that I've been working on, and I just haven't got it up, but that should be up soon too. So we'll be delivering fresh virtual reality tour content for you during the winter to kind of keep you interested. And even if you have checked these out before, check them out again. They're revamped, new interface, new content, exciting stuff. All right, I've spent enough time on the virtual reality tours. Now to archaeology in the news. We've got 6 news stories here. I don't know why it's doing that. I hope this isn't a repeat of a few months ago when I lost control of the computer. Thankfully, that was at the end of the stream, so it wasn't so bad. So we've got these 6 stories here. Yeah. So at the top, revisiting White Sands tracks. We talked about those. I believe that was when David Witt was our guest speaker. So that was an interesting story, and we've got a lot of questions about that since. So it's worthwhile diving in a little bit deeper and getting a little bit more of the details out of that. Then there's this very interesting paper, Rock Music, an auditory assessment of napping. So those of you who are familiar with my work, I'm assuming all of you at this point, I'm definitely an archaeoacoustics guy. I love investigating acoustics. Part of why we put together this Flute Players virtual tour. But this is something a little bit different. This is about the process of flint napping. So this is an interesting paper, and I'm looking forward to discussing that as well. Then we've got some Roman-era Turkish tombs. Quite a spectacular find. I actually hoped to get to this one, I believe, last month, and we just didn't have time for it, and I didn't want to kind of squeeze it too much, because this is definitely something that's it's worth taking a minute or two to really dive into the pictures. Then in yellow, we have Booming Dunes and Blythe and Taglios, and these are in yellow because they're both from the same source, PBS Terra. Now, for those who watched my Mesa talk last year, I've talked about Booming Dunes before. I've brought up the matter in my dissertation and talked about it at professional conferences as well. So this will be fun to talk about. And then the Blythe and Taglios, one of my favorite topics, basically the Nazca lines of California. And that's a very apt comparison, actually. So we'll talk about those a little bit, and I'm going to go beyond the details in the video, as always. And finally, we'll culminate with just a quick nod to the Archaeological Conservancy's virtual lecture, The Curious Case of Colorado Cannibal Alfred Packer. Spelled like that, but it's pronounced Alfred. There's reason behind that, and that's not a typo, so that's why I put that in quotes. All right. Revisiting White Sands, and because my face is, or the edge of my screen is kind of covering up the dates here, I'm going to kind of roll back to this view, and hopefully that's not too, you should be able to see that. Okay, so what you're seeing here is a diagram from the publication. And the way to read this is a very easy diagram to read, which is so rare in archaeology articles that I was just, hats off to them once again. We'll start, at the top, we've got the sediments that were closest to the surface, and then imagine you're looking at a profile view of their excavation trench. That's literally what we call it, is a unit profile. And so as we go down through different strata, layers of deposits. And within each of these, they have a number of attributes sort of labeled and indicated. One, they've indicated color to some degree, which is interesting. And I don't quite know exactly the color code on here. So these probably aren't quite true to life color, but it gives you some semblance of how there are differences in colors. Why would there be differences in colors? Well, we'll get to some of that when we get to the audience questions too. But I just want to really review. In fact, let's go back to here. Oh. All right, and I'm just going to turn my camera off so you can get this nice and big. All right, so we've got the dates, and the dates go to these points. These points are where there was some sort of burned material or some sort of seed, something with carbon in it that preserved, that they were able to do carbon-14 dates. Then we have TH8, TH7, TH6. TH corresponds with each of these layers. So every layer with a TH is somewhere that they found tracks, human footprints. What we'll notice right away, TH8, not a lot of data about that one, and that's way up here, next to this lighter stuff. And then we see a change happening right here. And we see this little divot. This divot's probably a channel that is cut through, so there were some deposits put in, and then a channel cut down through, and then more deposits went on top. And we see that again down here at TH7. Over here we've got footprints, right? So we've got number of sets of tracks. That means, number of human tracks. And then we also have number of trackways. Okay, so these are the number of these are the number of prints, and these are the number of people or the number of sets. You'll notice some of these actually have a 0. That's because there weren't enough footprints within their excavation area to be able to determine, how many trackways. Especially when you have just 2 footprints, it might be hard to tell, literally whether someone was coming or going. Then we have these standing figures with a number next to it. That indicates the number of people that the minimum number of people to produce those tracks. So, for example, in layer 4, we have 37 tracks from 5 different people, or 3 to 5 people, with 5 trackways. And we actually have ages here. The average age being 11.47 plus or minus about half a year. So the age of the individuals. Now some of those are adults and some of those are children. So we have a mixture of adults and children, implying that we have family groups. And then we see this sort of canid here. It's really difficult to tell if that's a wolf or a domestic dog, but it's not too early to be a domestic dog. What you'll notice is that TH1, the earliest layer with tracks, is all the way down here. At TH2, which is above TH1, meaning that presumably that's later, we have carbon dates from 22.86 plus or minus 0.32. So possibly as old as 23,000 years ago. Meanwhile, the earliest carbon dates come from TH6, and that the earliest 21.13 plus or minus 0.25. So that would be 20,880. Correct me if my math is wrong. So more than 20,000 years for the absolute minimum, and possibly as much as 23,000 years. And we can presume that the lower layers are older. So these dates are actually pretty firm, with some caveats that they say that they've addressed. So I'm going to give them the benefit of the doubt for the fact that we have, say, hard water, so there might be old carbonates that could skew dates. They claim to have compensated for that. Now, I said I'd get back to the colors here, and that's because we see that there's there's a shift happening right here, and then we have another shift, especially like right here and up. And we have different sediments. These are more loose sands, and these are more compacted, consolidated alluvial deposits, possibly lacustrine or lake deposits, especially down in here. So we have a wetland, and we see some of that wetland material here. There's probably thin layers of that where a lake comes and goes and comes and goes and comes and goes. Might even be doing that like annually or on a period cycle of maybe a couple of centuries to, yeah. And we notice TH8 has this mammoth right there. So this is going to be the latest that it could be Pleistocene. And we see those laminations, and we see this possible channel cutting in. So that indicates that the lake was retreating at or around this time. And then we see the sand deposits. So the Pleistocene lake, or pluvial lake as we call them, was gone. And so then you're not going to have footprints preserved in just straight sand. So this also is a record of environmental change, where we have, these are probably shallow lake deposits, and that's why the footprints are in there, because it was kind of muddy, and then that material hardened and was capped by more material. We have carbon dates from above the earliest set of tracks. We have very old carbon dates associated with specific sets of tracks, as well as in between. There's a very strong sequence here, so they've supported their argument very well. Now, the question that we get is, well, do we have this here at Mesa Prieta or the northern Rio Grande? And that's a difficult question to answer. And a part of it is, if you look at this stratigraphy, again, this is a record of climate change, basically, from the end of the Pleistocene through today. Now, this isn't accounting for anthropogenic climate change, which has been going on since the Industrial Revolution and is still accelerating. This is a longer period, more gradual climate change that's related to what we call Milankovitch cycles, which I don't have time to get into. Just YouTube it. There's plenty of channels that cover it. Basically, the Earth's long period oscillations between ice ages and what we get at this related to the orbit and the axial tilt. Again, I don't have time to get into it, but we see a transition happening, and that transition is kind of even like punctuated, right? We see a little bit of that transition happening, and it gradually goes from the thicker, muddier deposits to more of these alternating lenses to just the sand on top. Now, White Sands is in a basin, so everything drains in. But here at Mesa Prieta, the capstone that created the mesa formed 3.4 million years ago from a lava flow. At that time, that caused water to shed down the sides and then to downcut through softer deposits, alluvial deposits, from materials coming down from the from materials coming down from the Sangre de Cristo Mountains. So these sediments underneath the capstone are rounded cobbles. I was gonna take you out and show you it. Had some technical issues, but we've got lots of cobbles. We have some bedding of sandstone. Probably not like an inland sea or anything. It's probably just finer sandy deposits getting compacted by all this weight, especially during a wetter period. You could get the mineral accretions that form sandstone. It's not very high grade. And you can see the sort of flat surfaces in profile, because you get these gently sloping alluvial plains that we call bajada. And that's sloping down from the Sangre de Cristos all the way down into the river valley, which is a rift zone, so the bottom keeps getting lower. So what happens is that the materials on top get kind of cut through by rivers, and and side channels, and the stuff that's, you're not going to get footprints into basalt. You'll get footprint petroglyphs, but they're not actual like human footprints, right? And because the mesa is, it's also a bluff, right? It's a high point on the landscape. So anything on top of it, you're going to get a lot of wind erosion, and then the water's going to wash off the side. So you don't have sediment accumulating on top to preserve stuff. And that's what really makes white sands happen, is that you have all those sediments on top preserving it. So I hope I answered that question sufficiently. And yeah, let me know in the comments if I didn't. There we go. All right. So there's that. And we can get, I'm just having some glitches here. There we go. Now I should be back. Yeah. Okay. We can move on. Rock music, an auditory assessment of napping. And in the description, I have a link to the article itself. This is an academic article, and sorry to those of you who don't have access to a university library. But this was brought to my attention, and it's something that I've suspected that there is evidence of. There are sites elsewhere. There's a particular site in Oregon where there's a lake, and there's on one end a bluff with petroglyphs on it, and then on either side of the lake you have lithic scatters, which is the debitage, the debris from making the stone tools. And because of this theory that petroglyphs are associated with acoustics, with echoing rock surfaces, well, we see the petroglyphs on what should be an echoing rock surface. Also remember, flat water surfaces will echo too. And so if you're flint napping on one side of the lake, echoes will come from the rocks and from the water surface to the other spot where they're also flint napping. That's not the site that they're talking about in this article, but they are talking about the same thing, that there is a very percussive sound, and you're naturally going to get into this pretty rhythmically, especially if you're an experienced flint napper and working with other experienced flint nappers. There are certain psychological concepts involved in which people will start to synchronize their work. And this is seen especially in auditory practices, whether it's in flint napping or there was a professor at the University of California, Santa Cruz, again, my alma mater, shout out, who did some work on bells and the use of bells to synchronize work. And what you kind of hear happen when you have these auditory syncing of working groups is that you'll hear your neighbor. You might start with a different rhythm. There might be a couple of different rhythms going on, but just through sheer multiplication, those rhythms are going to sync up periodically, right? So if you're doing, like a 3/4 time beat and someone's doing a 4/4 time beat, those are going to come back around. You're going to actually have a combined beat of 6/8 time that would encapsulate both, and so that's how people start to sync up together, right? Like you get a rhythm, you get a couple of rhythms, you get polyrhythms. For those of you who like metal music, polyrhythms, and when you get the sort of polyrhythms, people will start to integrate with that. You also hear this in drum circles too. So you might have a couple of different rhythms going, but then you get this repeating pattern that becomes visually appealing and begins to get people to synchronize up because of those sorts of overlaps between the rhythms, the repetition of that pattern. So that's pretty cool. And what you're seeing here is a photo from our summer youth intern program where we did a flint napping workshop. So needed a visual for this one, and here we go. This is a flint napping workshop. We have to do more hands-on stuff like that in the coming year or two. Moving right along. The Roman era Turkish tombs. Like I said, this is a fascinating story. This is in the town of Blondus, or city of Blondus. Blondus is an ancient Mediterranean classic period site, Roman era site, and it's in Anatolia, Turkey. So we see influences of Romans, such as in the painting that you see for the background here, but we also see some local variation. Blondes has been known for quite a long time, actually. You can't really hide ruins like this. And there's a really distinctive architectural style, right? It's almost megalithic, or almost in reference to megalithic, which is an architectural style from a completely different era, from the Neolithic, which would be millennia prior. But we see it almost in dialogue with that, at least the architecture in the town, even though, these aren't Roman columns. They're not rounded. They don't have the classical order. They don't have the classical order capitals on top. So it's a distinctive place, but it's definitely a part of that world. We should also consider that we call this Roman era, but there was a lot going on in the Mediterranean at this time. The Romans were fighting with the Carthaginians, who were basically Phoenician. Actually, I think Carthage has been leveled by this point. This is a Common Era site, probably about 200 CE, so 200 AD, versus Carthage was. Let me know in the comments. I'm pretty sure Carthage was already gone for a couple centuries by that point. But the point is that it's not just Romans who were influencing the Anatolians. We've got these, and so we see these tombs here. Let's see if I can cut to, oh yeah, we'll just, yeah, there we go. Camera off. Bam. All right, you see these tombs, and this is what we're really focusing on, because this is from a press release by the Turkish organization, state-run organization, Anadolu Agency, and they said 400 tombs discovered, but this is really more about the, first, 400 tombs. It's not just those three. There's a lot. There's a lot of these here, and you can even see some of the paths connecting them. These are rock-cut tombs, so cut into there. Many of you probably would expect this type of tomb from the Roman era in this region of the world, so that's not so surprising, but it's the number that are. And the thing is AA, I'm just going to call them, Anadolu Agency, did this press release saying that these 400 beautifully painted tombs, intricately painted tombs like we see here, are just discovered. And look at the fine brushwork in here. We definitely see some of that classical Roman influence in the images, in the type of material. I mean, the painting onto the plaster, like that. I don't know about the composition of the pigments, but I would assume that too. But the thing is that this is actually a restoration project, and so this is a restoration project, and that's what the announcement is really focusing on. So since restoration work is well underway on some 400 tombs, and it takes a long time to document, it takes a minute to document one tomb, it takes a long time to document 400. It's hard to believe that these are just discovered. This is probably more of finally getting the public announcement, finally being ready to make a public announcement about progress in preparing these for, hopefully, a visiting public. We don't know a lot of the details because the press releases are being managed by this state-run agency, and that's fine. It's great that most countries, Turkey included, take a stake in their cultural heritage, but it's sometimes frustrating because there doesn't seem to yet be an academic article about this, and I really wanted to do a deeper dive. So we're just gonna have to leave that one at the pictures there. All right, and if dunes. And I've got an even better view for the dunes here. And hop right in alongside. So, like I said, we're going to talk briefly about these PBS Terra documentaries. Documentaries, they're like less than 10 minutes, episodes. So PBS Terra is sort of these short educational clips that focus on both sort of the natural world and on cultural history. And I especially liked these ones because, well, for those of you, like I mentioned, who have tuned in to my previous talks, familiar with my previous work, I've talked about booming dunes before. And once again, I'll pop off. There we go. This is actually one of the sites that they filmed at for that. And so this is Kelso Dunes in Southern California. Perfectly open to the public. And I mean, you could see footprints just vanishing out into the distance. These dunes are massive. And what's really astounding about these is when they're completely dry, like happens in the summer in the Mojave Desert, is that they can actually vibrate and resonate with all the sand that's filling the volume, and you get these cascades of sand over the lee side that sort of vibrate. The sand starts to behave like a fluid, creating these sort of shock waves that are magnified because certain types of sand, high silica sand, will, when there's no water in between the grains, actually do this. This was a phenomenon that seems to have first been written down by Marco Polo, although we know it was known before Marco Polo. And that's because there are other booming dunes, including, there we go, where I've done some of my previous research. So you see this map of California and Nevada, and that's from, I've linked the article in the description as well, at least the reference to this. There are booming dunes in California and Nevada, and in fact, even here in, well, not here in New Mexico necessarily, but just north of here in Colorado, about a 2.5 hour drive from where I am right now. So that would be a little over a 3 hour drive, maybe about 3.5 hour drive from Santa Fe, add an extra hour from, it's about a 3 hour drive from Santa Fe, about a 4 hour drive from Albuquerque would be Great Sand Dunes. And Great Sand Dunes in Colorado is also booming dunes. I put a link to that one in the description as well, if you want to learn more about that. So this is something that, right here, that's a day trip. Especially if you're in Santa Fe, Espanola, Taos, that's a day trip. That's right nearby. Two of these sets of dunes, actually, two of the sets of booming dunes and 5 of the sets of dunes on this map are very close to where I did my dissertation, and so I actually mentioned them briefly in the end of that. They were familiar to the Shoshone and Paiute of the area, and for Kelso Dunes, the Kwayasu. Not only that, but we know that at least some of these were culturally significant because of that. And you know, these people were around for, some would say, several hundred years. I'm more in the camp of probably several thousand years, but we'll get into various theories about ethnogenesis, and don't have time for that. These booming dunes were sort of venerated. They were included in ceremonial dances, in seasonal celebrations. Their booming was a part of the song. And if you've, again, I mentioned Pueblo dances. If you've attended a Pueblo dance and know how important song music is, then you can imagine how to the more nomadic Shoshone and Paiute, how important it could be if the landscape, it seems like it's singing along. The pitch can vary quite a bit, and different sets of dunes do that differently. I don't believe that white sands boom. I don't think that gypsum is one of the types. It does have silica, but it's the wrong shape. It's a lower silica content. I could be wrong. Correct me if I'm wrong. So yeah, booming dunes, a part of a topic close to my own heart. And then we have the Blythe intaglios. I've brought these up in courses that I've taught as well. These are essentially California's Nazca lines, made in the same way. And so you get these, again, sloping alluvial plains. We were talking about that around here, right? But in the Mojave and Sonoran deserts, it's so dry that, after a while, all the loose sediments get blown away, and you're left with what we call desert pavement, which is just the stones that are just big enough that they're not going to get blown away by the wind. And so those develop a patina. So we know about the desert varnish on the basalt here at the mesa that allows us to see the petroglyphs. It's when they peck through that patina, that desert varnish, that you can see the lighter spots where they peck through that make the petroglyphs. Well, similarly, stones in the desert pavement, the exposed stones, too heavy to be wind blown on an alluvial surface, and they've been facing up for thousands of years, minimally several thousand years, so that they've been exposed to the weather and have developed this patina. In a similar way to like being able to break through the surface, if you just scrape off that top layer, the ones below those haven't been exposed, so they don't have that patina, so they're going to appear brighter. And that's how the Nazca lines were made. The same technique was used to make these figures in it's the Sonoran Desert, because it's along the banks of the Colorado River on the top of an old river terrace. And this is what's happened. Once again, they've just removed stuff from the middle to expose the lighter colored rocks, making these visible. It's a shame that these have been vandalized. You'll see in the video these circular paths. Those are ATV tracks. For some reason, they zoom in on a set of ATV tracks at one point. I'm like, what the heck are you doing? But what's really great about this documentary is that they interview a Chemehuevi man, a Chemehuevi historian. And so they're giving an indigenous perspective rather than, some guy, some privileged white guy with his own agenda. They actually gave an indigenous historian time on the screen. So that was really well done, especially for an under 10-minute documentary short. And then we're going to get back to... All right, now we can do... Oh yeah, camera back on. Right there. Finally, our final story, and almost perfect on time, just a tad over. We have the curious case of the Colorado cannibal Alfred Packer, spelled Alfred, but pronounced Alfred. And so this was a virtual lecture recently given through the Archaeological Conservancy's lecture series by Dr. Eren Baxter. Now, TAC, the Archaeological Conservancy, is one of our primary supporters. They actually own the Wells Petroglyph Preserve and have been instrumental to preservation, and we work for them and on behalf of them to operate on there. So we love TAC, and you may have even noticed that the Conservancy has featured us earlier this year in their virtual tours, which are they're supposed to be short films, but we took up a bit more time for them. We're almost feature length. They really do love the Wells Preserve. Check out the Archaeological Conservancy. Head over to their YouTube channel, to their website. This is available on both. Yeah, this is fascinating because Alfred Packer was actually, I was familiar with Alfred Packer through Trey Parker and Matt Stone's early work, Cannibal, the musical. And I think at the beginning they do say that it's based on a true story, but I'm like, yeah, right, it's Trey Parker and Matt Stone. It's the South Park guys. Like, there's no way that this is even remotely based on a true story. They're just doing that for storytelling points. Yeah, it's based on a true story. This guy set out from Utah, I believe Provo, to head to Colorado with a group of 5 men to exploit mining. I believe it was for silver mining, to cash in on a silver boom, and not everyone made it back. They got lost. They were sighted a couple of times along the way, and in the end, only Packer comes down from the mountain, and he gets kind of dodgy about, like, what happened to the rest of your party? Oh no, man, I got injured and separated from the group, and just kind of like no, seriously, where'd they go? Help us find them. We gotta and when they found them, it was very clear that it wasn't bears chewing on them. It was definitely Packer had a taste, if you will, for the forbidden hamburger. And so this has actually become sort of a folk story throughout Colorado. We're not quite sure where the truth lies. We are sure that Packer, he said he didn't eat them, or that he tried but it made him sick. He changed the story a bunch, but we're fairly sure from the evidence, spoiler alert, that he ate them. And so it's a running joke in parts of Colorado to this day of, naming a restaurant or a grill after Alfred Packer. So I'd love that irreverent humor. And it's very fascinating. If you want to learn more about the Packer story, check out Aaron Baxter's talk. Dr. Baxter is actually a fairly entertaining speaker, a very engaged speaker. So head over there, check it out, support the Archaeological Conservancy. Not only are they helping preserve the Welsh petroglyph preserve, but they're preserving a number of cultural heritage sites throughout the United States. And in fact, they've got a new virtual tour coming out fairly soon. I forget the site, but I believe it's another New Mexico site. So check them out, support the Archaeological Conservancy. And that's about it. That's about all that I have for the stream today. Thank you all for tuning in, for going just a couple minutes over with me. I hope that you're excited for Season 3. I sure am. And I've also enjoyed this opportunity today to kind of get caught up on some of these news stories. Like I said, some of these are near and dear to my heart, like the booming dunes and the Blythe and Taglios. As I say, California's Nazca lines. The Packer story is, right outside this window are the foothills of the Rocky Mountains. I actually live in the Rocky Mountains, just a few miles that way. But and so Packer is one of those nearly mythological beings of the Rocky Mountains, and maybe I should do some more stories on this at some point. We'll see how things go. But yeah, so that was a very fascinating one. And one last note on the booming dunes. I mentioned that there's some in Colorado. There's also, they're not always in deserts. There are booming dunes on the island of Kauai, in Hawaii. So if you're in Hawaii, check out the Garden Island and see if you can hear the dunes. It doesn't always have to be a desert. Probably got to be on the lee side though. So thank you all for tuning in. That's all I've got for you for today, and we'll see you next month with our special guest, Ken Fetter.